the Honourable Leader of the official New Democratic Party. Caught myself there.
Mr. Speaker, we're not like the IRA, having both an official and a provisional component. Thank you very much, and I'm glad to begin to make some comments and assessments of the government's program as it's set out in the speech from the throne in the time remaining before us this afternoon, and then to probably complete those comments at a later time. But I'd like to begin by making a prefatory remark about the much appreciated gesture of the government yesterday to divide the position of the Deputy Speaker amongst the three parties in the House. I think it is a worthwhile and significant gesture, and sometimes when people say the word gesture, they couple that with the word mere, a mere gesture. I don't mean gesture in that sense, because I think gestures are often things of significance. I remember when I first came to this work 12 years ago, amongst the first things that happened after I took my seat in the new then majority NDP government was that the House Leader at the time, Frank Corbett, got up and read a resolution, much like the resolution that was read yesterday by the Liberal House Leader, providing that the Deputy Speaker's position should be held jointly by the three parties. And I had followed matters in the years previous to that closely enough to know that that was a custom that had been developed over 2 or 3 administrations previously, which had been minority administrations. And in the organization of those minority governments, so as to produce the maximum amount of stability, that program of dividing the Deputy Speaker position had been something that had been enacted. And so that when in a majority situation, when the government that I newly was part of made that gesture towards the other 2 parties of the House, it was something that I felt proud to be associated with. I think there is a largeness about that kind of gesture. I think about the great Nova Scotian novelist Charles Bruce, who in his signature novel, The Channel Shore, about the people of Guysborough County, says somewhere in the novel something to the effect that as different as they all were, one thing they all had in common was that they weren't small. So I think it's important in politics that as different as parties are, that the relationship between them not be small. So I just want to say that first, by way of preface, that that's something that we in our party acknowledge with appreciation. So turning then to the speech from the throne itself, the speech begins on its first page with an acknowledgement that we are in the ancestral and unceded territory, the Mi'kmaq people. But I want to continue in that vein and to say also, as I begin my own response to the speech, to say something that I think is also necessary to say on that foundation in these days. I want to begin also by acknowledging that this acknowledgement means that the peace and friendship treaties of 1752 and 1760-61 also provide the constitutional context for all law making and all regulation making that takes place here including that, I wish to say, of the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans, as well as of the Provincial Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture. So having said that first, I want to second continue and to point out that at this place in the Speech on the Throne does not continue, does quite jarringly and startlingly, does not go on to say anywhere in its contents those three words which really encapsulate a great deal of the vision and the hope that has been expressed by the people of Nova Scotia in that whole year-long period since the House had reconvened over the pandemic. And so let me just begin by saying those three words out loud, which the speech omits to do so. The words, Black Lives Matter. And let me then continue further, returning to the speech, to express also another word of appreciation on the third page for the government's having included the tribute here to Alexa McDonough in connection with the recent 40th anniversary of her having been elected as the first woman to lead a major political party in Canada, when in 1980 she became leader of the NDP in Nova Scotia. This is a milestone, of course. Is very meaningful in our caucus, since we are the caucus with the greatest proportion of women of any caucus elected to official party status in any jurisdiction in the history of our country. I think it's additionally significant that this historic achievement of Alexa McDonough has been marked in the Speech on the Throne on the week of International Women's Day. So we in the NDP appreciate that the government has understood that this is a marker and a milestone, the importance of which should be shared with the people of our province. But from there, I want to turn, in the speech from the throne, to the speech's real programmatic contents. Now, the speech's real programmatic contents are organized under the heading Recovery, Renewal, and Respect. Now, I am an appreciator of the art of alliteration, and I must say that the author of this text has really brought forward some very fine phrasing. Recovery, renewal, and respect. It's such fine phrasing, in fact, that I want to try to partly mirror in my own comments the same logic by organizing my response to this speech and saying that as a defining document, I find it made up of the disingenuous, the depthless, and the deleted. Let me begin with the disingenuous. It is disingenuous, to begin with, for the government to present the following sentence about long-term care in the speech from the throne. A tragic outcome of the pandemic was the way in which our seniors were living in these facilities. That's quote unquote. As though the government were somehow a group of objective field anthropologists who just happened to stumble upon this unfortunate reality in nursing homes and bear no real connection or no real responsibility for the disturbing situation. The opposite is true. Let me offer, Mr. Speaker, a list of reasons for the conditions, as the speech puts it, the conditions in which our seniors are living in these facilities, quote, unquote. Reason number one, the cutbacks in the operating funds that provide for recreation programming, staffing, and diet in the long-term care facilities of Nova Scotia, which were imposed in the middle years of this government's administration, and which a majority of the ministers of this government today stood in their places when their name was called and said yes to. And I defy the government to produce one single administrator of a nursing home that received those cuts in Nova Scotia, one single administrator of a nursing home who will say anything other than that the impact of those cuts still is being felt today. Number two reason for, as the speech says it, the way our seniors were living in these facilities, quote unquote, is the negative and harmful impact of the government's decision not to open a single new nursing home bed, not facility, mind you. It wasn't simply that they failed to open a single facility. Their decision not to open a single bed, not a single bed, in the midst of the greatest graying tsunami in the history of the province, from the time they came to power in 2013 until last year, with the result that when the pandemic struck, the virus found thousands of residents of long-term care in Nova Scotia in double, in triple, and quadruple accommodation older facilities where they were thereby placed at much increased risk as a consequence of shared living and washroom space, risk to the transmission of the virus. And in case anybody should think that this is a case of COVID hindsight, looking back being 2020, I want to be very clear that this government was told very precisely, long previously, about the infection control implications of their moratorium on new long-term care facility construction. They were told this both by their own Department of Health and Wellness and on this floor in this House by the NDP. Number 3 reason, Mr. Speaker, for the way, to use the speech's words, our seniors were living in these facilities, quote unquote. Number 3 reason is that the recommendations for dramatic facility staffing increases commensurate with the change in frailty and acuity of nursing home populations in recent years, recommendations which have come from a raft of studies, including from the Nova Scotia Nurses Union, the Nursing Homes Association of Nova Scotia, and the government's own expert panel on long-term care. These recommendations have not been enacted, with the consequence that every hour in Nova Scotia, dozens of bells are rung at bedsides, bells that should be answered, which staff are heartbroken by their chronic inability to answer those bells in a timely way because the government has not shouldered its responsibility to provide, train, hire, and properly pay the numbers of staff that are required to adequately carry out this extraordinarily important work. These then are some of the reasons for the situation that COVID found in the nursing homes of Nova Scotia. And to address this issue without acknowledging this is disingenuous in my view. That's disingenuous, Mr. Speaker, but let me tell you what in the speech is disingenuous and discouraging. And that's the following sentence on the subject which my friend and colleague, the member for Halifax Needham, has been discussing earlier today. This sentence: in the forestry sector, my government will accelerate the implementation of the recommendations of the report of Professor William Leahy to adopt ecological forestry principles. Now, I find this discouraging. I use the word advisedly, because discouraging is precisely the word that Mr. Leahy used earlier this week to describe the repeated delays in the implementation of the Triad Ecological Forestry Framework of his 2018, that's 2018, Mr. Speaker, that's 3 years ago. Aren't you awful glad these aren't the people who were in charge of rolling out the CERB? Never mind, I'll go back. I'm sorry, I'm digressing. Mr. Lay said that he was discouraged. He found found it discouraging to look at the repeated delays in the implementation of his review, because these were recommendations that the government said at the time that they were brought forward that they accepted. Now, what Mr. Leahy is rightly discouraged about, what the member for Halifax Needham has said earlier, she is rightly discouraged about. What Jacob Fillmore, out in his hunger strike on Hollis Street, is discouraged about. What a multiplicity of groups and interests concerned about sustainability in both the woods and the forest economy across our province are profoundly all discouraged about is the fact that the Leahy recommendations are at all in a position where they need to be accelerated today. And the reason they need to be accelerated is that precisely the need for this acceleration was created, one, by the elimination of the clear-cutting limitations out of the natural resources strategy by this government. Two, the stalling and bringing forward the Leahy report in 2018 in the first place by this government's department. And three, the 30-month foot-dragging in the implementation of the Leahy framework by that same government, same department, under the former leadership and motivation of the present Premier, who now tells us in the speech from the throne that he's going to accelerate the implementation of that which we're somehow given in the document to understand, accelerate the development of that which has been just quite inexplicably held back, slowed down, delayed. So I find this disingenuous, Mr. Speaker. But I want to go on and say that in addition to the...
I would ask the member to not use the word disingenuous because it's unparliamentary.
Speaker, I'll go on to say that in addition to the dimension of the speech to which I have been objecting, there's also a great deal in this speech that I think it is fair to describe as depthless, as in superficial, lacking in substance, thin, a kind of performative progressivism that is mainly adept at signaling the right things or inserting the right vocabulary in the right places so as to point to and evoke that which does not necessarily have the commitment to actually bring about. For example, what I mean by depthless, on page 6, my government is committed to working with the federal government on a national child care strategy because child care is critical. Whoa! Hold the phone. Can't you just hear a parent home with their infant and their 3-year-old? They're piling up debts faster than you can say minimum payment because any child care they might be able to get is going to be too expensive, that it's not going to be worth taking any job that they're going to be able to find. Can't you just see that parent when their partner comes home at the end of the day and say, whoa, I got some good news today. Wait till I tell you what I heard. The provincial Liberal government is working to liaise with the federal government on a national child care strategy. I don't think so. Let's get real. Women were disproportionately affected by the pandemic wave of job and income losses to such an extent in our province, and women have disproportionately not returned to work, and their incomes have disproportionately been affected in the long months since then, in significant part because the provincial provision of childcare in Nova Scotia is so unsystematic, underfinanced, and lousy. Here's real. The economic multiplier for government investment in affordable, accessible childcare is $1 to $2.25, which is a whopping order of magnitude greater than even, say, construction. And the reason for this is the dual economic benefits that come from investment in childcare. Because there are, on the one hand, the job creation impacts of the hiring of a network of early childhood educators across the province, while on the other hand, there is also at the same time the high-octane economic development rocket fuel of increases in the labor force participation that happen when parents, primarily women, go back to work. That's a big part of the reason why progressive jurisdictions like British Columbia are investing so heavily in affordable, accessible childcare. The absence of parallel investment and a parallel actual system is one of the leading reasons why Nova Scotia today has the lowest median income in the country. So we don't need a performative commitment to liaise with the federal government on a national child care strategy, unquote. What we need is affordable, accessible, quality, universal child care in Nova Scotia so our people can improve their lives by being able to actually afford to go to work. And when I say, Mr. Speaker, that I find the speech from the throne characterized also by not just the depthless and also the deleted. I want to tell you what I mean by deleted, because what I mean is that which is omitted, that which is absent, that which is left out. It is, in my view, preposterous and incompetent that at the 1 year mark of a global pandemic, in which the second most common site of transmission of the virus after long-term care has been workplaces, that the government should show up after a year of having been unwilling to face the elected representatives of the people of the province, should show up with a throne speech that makes absolutely zero mention and shows no indication of being even tangentially aware of the huge public health/economy question of paid sick leave today in Nova Scotia. 1 year ago this past Monday, the first COVID-19 death in Canada took place. It was, as I said here yesterday, in a long-term care facility where sick leave provisions had recently been cut back. An employee went to work, although she was experiencing flu-like symptoms, because she was not in a financial position to do anything else. The symptoms turned out to be COVID, and 20 residents passed away in the ensuing outbreak. This is the type of situation on the basis of which such a wide range of voices has been raised in favor of paid sick days, not as a matter of the possible beneficence of one's employer, but as a matter like statutory holidays or vacations of provincial employment standards embedded in the Labour Standards Code. International Monetary Fund Director Kristalina Georgieva has called for it. Dr. Theresa Tam, Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, has called for it. Citizens of Quebec and Prince Edward Island and employees of federally regulated workplaces have it. 13 states have implemented it, along with a wide range of cities. We're in a province where over half of our workforce has no paid sick days whatsoever. A province where we have more than 1,000 nurses. More than 1,000 nurses, mind you, who normally work without paid sick days. And the Liberal government of Nova Scotia responds by dedicating to this subject in its speech from the throne after a year's absence from legislative discourse, dedicating exactly what? Excuse me, nothing. I find it a deletion that is disturbing. And it's also this kind of omission that speaks of being at a significant remove from people's daily lives, that there's not a mention whatsoever either in this throne speech of the subject of rent control. So let's follow the lead of the speech and talk for a minute about economics. Here we are, facing the greatest economic contraction in the memory of anybody under the age of 85, at the core of which is the mega hit which people's incomes and their ability to spend have taken as a result of the pandemic. There's only one viable path out of this economic hole, and that lies along the road of strengthening the buying power, the purchasing power of consumers. Now, does anybody seriously think that the purchasing power of consumers in Nova Scotia can be adequately restored in a situation where the average rent for a two-bedroom apartment in Halifax has increased by 43% in the last 5 years? Does anybody seriously think that our economy can be adequately stimulated back to something approximating health in a situation where, as is the case today, 20% of our renters pay out 50% or more of their income for their rent? I don't think so. Mr. Speaker, you will allow me to point out one more omission as I'm closing, one more, I think, glaring absence in this throne speech. It is, in my judgment, simply unseemly that in this province where we enjoy the highest rate of child poverty in Canada, in this province where we are the only province where child poverty has continued to worsen since the introduction of the Canada Child Benefit, while in every other province it has improved. In this province where the number of households fed through food banks has increased by 15% since this government last faced the representatives of those it serves. In this province where the province-wide child poverty rate for kids under 6 is now just a half a hair short of 30%, that in these circumstances, the government should bring forward a throne speech in which they do not even utter the word, do not even mention the thought of child poverty in the defining document in which they set out their whole program. Omitted, deleted, gone. What I find deleted, what I find absent, Mr. Speaker, in this speech from the throne, I'll say just lastly, is exactly the framework of, as it calls itself, recovery, renewal, and respect, in terms of which the government has attempted to present themselves in this document. What we have here instead in front of us is a combination of the deleted, the depthless, and whatever I would be able to say if I had longer to think about it alliteratively, a word beginning with D, which is not the unparliamentary word disingenuous, in a way that does not appear effectively remediable in my judgment, Mr. Speaker. This is all true, short of the electoral opportunity that will soon be provided to bring forward something better. Thank you.